Hi, welcome everyone to the Front-End Frameworks Workshop, where we spark the reaction in user interface and experience. So what I plan for this workshop is that it's an intuitive explanation of why we do things the way they are. This is not the workshop where we explain a lot of the syntax. It's more of why exactly do we do certain things that way. So there's really two main parts of this workshop. Firstly is all about the front-end frameworks, and then the second part of this workshop is about React. After this workshop, there's going to be a Vue workshop, which is probably the alternative of React for people doing in the Waze project. So this is our outline. So introduction, we have job markets and trends. We have the problems in front-end engineering. How does front-end framework solve our problem? And then we go to React. All right? So firstly, introductions. So front-end engineering is probably one of the most important aspects of web development, but it's also one of the things that are feared by developers. Because it's kind of really hard if you actually try it. Like for example, with this one, getting plain CSS just to align certain things, it's like really hard. Like take a look at this, for example, everything's all good and well. We learn to create a website, then we add HTML to it, and then we add CSS to it, and then suddenly text doesn't seem the way they are. But also the fact that front-end engineering is probably one aspect that is sometimes underappreciated at a certain extent, because you have websites or tools such as, for example, Squarespace, WordPress, that makes it look easy to create websites. But yeah, it does make it look easy to create website at certain degrees of level. But if you create web applications, the game changes a lot. And probably another thing with user interface is it's like a joke. If you have to explain it, it's not that good. You want to create a user interface that not only works for a couple of people, but works for everyone. Something like just a user interface for you to call it intuitive. It has to conform with certain standards or what people expect. Like one of the expectations, an example would be is the fact that the logout button is always at the top right-hand corner. You go out to any websites out there, you go to Google, YouTube, go to the top right corner, you log out. You go to Facebook, go to the top right corner and log out. There's this uniformity of designs, which is not always something that is thought about. It felt like something that you just had to know. That's basically what intuitive means in terms of user designs. So what about job markets and trends? So looking at the survey done by Stack Overflow, this is the role that developers think they belong to. So I'm pretty sure with this one you could answer multiple ways. So 55.2% of the developers said they're a backend developers. Like they identify as a backend developer. 54.9% of those developers think that they belong to the category of full stacks. And then 37.1% goes to front end. But take a look at these three main things. This is probably the roles that are much more relevant in the web development side. So full stack and front end, they both create front ends, something that can be seen, and then back ends, the logic behind. But front end is one of the important bits, like what I said in the previous slide. And if you take a look at all the applications out there, social medias, it's always going to have a front end. Any web apps out there that you interact with will have some sort of interface. That's the reason why it makes a difference. And furthermore, if you take a look at the startups or companies that are here in Perth, there's probably a lot of them, and majority of them are software-based. I think you might have heard a lot of them. Health engines, there's that one, pretty famous here. You have Flux, SpaceCube, and all sorts of other ones. All of them it started with softwares, or mainly it's a web application that is accessible to a lot of people. So I guess that's the job markets. And I can tell you that in terms of job demand, it's probably increasing here in Perth because of the fact that technology is always on the rise. And just a couple of days ago, well, not really a couple of days ago, many months ago, I've been observing things that are happening in LinkedIn, and I'm always getting these job alerts like high priority, software developer, full stack developer, and all sorts of things. And one way or the other, it will require some sort of front end. So I was looking at the Bank West job positions. They're requiring a Angular JS engineer, for example. So yeah, front end is quite really important. And which brings us to the next topics. So what about the future of front ends? Now that GitHub Pilot's coming into play, and then you also have some sort of drag and drops. Well, think about this in this case. I'm not really sure if an AI could probably do a good-looking interface, because a good-looking interface is quite hard to distinguish. It's easy for a lot of the backend aspects because it's logical, it's objective. But when it comes to user interface, it's kind of a little bit of a blur because some people prefer it this way, some people prefer it that way in terms of laying out a website. So, could it be getting replaced by AIs, drag and drops? Is it far from reality? Well, I don't have the answers for you in this workshop, but it's probably good to keep in mind about that. Alright. Now, it brings us to the problems of front-end engineering. So, the importance of front-end engineering now. But why do a lot of developers fear this type of topic? Well, because there's a lot of really tedious bits about front-end engineering. One bit about it is the cross-browser support, Like, because Microsoft, back in the days, they wanted to be like, they want to be different. So they created internet browsers that conform to different standards. So what ends up happening is that the code that you write at other browsers don't necessarily work at other browsers. So here's this meme. Front-end devs hate this trick. Use Internet Explorer. So yeah. And there's another bit about that, is that HTML is wet. And I'm saying wet as in the fact that it's not dry. It's all about repeating yourself in HTML. So yesterday I was looking at one of the GitHub posts, and take a look at this. These are just chips with a couple of designs and links. And take a look at the code behind, as in just to make this display. There's a lot of bits and pieces out here that are quite repetitive. There's only probably a couple of things that change. The href changes a little bit. The title also changes a little bit. And also probably this one. But all the other bits out here, they're similar. So if you think about it, you go to a certain code base, and if it's just full of HTML, what if I'm displaying hundreds of listings? Then I'm going to be seeing a lot of 100 gibberish text or more on it's repeated. And if you ever develop in just pure HTML, you're gonna have problems wherein you change one of them, or you change a couple of them, and then all of a sudden you have inconsistencies in the way it looks. And this is where we go with CSS problems again, wherein, I just accidentally put one slash in one of the hundreds of chips that I have. Now everything is disaligned. So that's one problem of it, which also brings us to the next ones. Inefficiencies of reloading. If you take a look at a certain website, there's a lot of places out here that are quite similar and they don't change a lot. YouTube, for example, you're always going to have a sidebar. You go to the homepage, you go to some certain videos, you're always going to have a sidebar with this same amount of informations. You're always going to have the header. And at a certain extent, you're also going to have the same form of JavaScript and also CSS. It's the same styling, you go to different page. So if we go back to the first principles of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, is the fact that for the browser to render your website, you have to go to a certain URL. And that URL sends HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But it brings us to the questions as, why do if I go to different pages, why do I have to reload the sidebar? Why do I have to get the HTML of that sidebar? Why do I have to get the HTML part of the header as well? And also the listings here. Now, let's take a look at this, for example. I was listening to this while creating to this workshop. What if I go to the next video, This part, it does not change. This part probably goes to this one. So you load a little bit much more data of this particular video. But this listing, the picture, the meta information, they just move up. So with just fewer web technologies, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, you just have to reload that. Unless you use asynchronous JavaScript to actually load data and render HTML for you. Furthermore, inefficiencies of reloading. What about if we have notifications and real-time updates? We have a website that receives some sort of new informations. How do we get that new information? So traditionally, you're going to have to refresh your website every single time so that you get the new informations. So as you can see, there's a lot of problems that we're already encountering with just the basic web. And to actually make it much more intuitive, we use JavaScript. Which brings us probably to one of the next problems. But we're going to look at this as a case study. So this is a website that I built with a couple of my group mates back in SITS 3403, Agile Web Development. We created a real-time multiplayer song guessing game. We get the data from Spotify. So there's a lot of things that you can see about this one. If you're going to do real-time multiplayer, then you're going to need real-time connections with different browsers. So it links up back to the previous slide. What if I need real-time data? And that's a lot of the apps these days actually requires real-time data. You take a look at Uber, for example. I'm getting a car, and then after a certain amount of time, the data or interface is going to update. I have Facebook. My friend messaged me, and the only time I could really get their updates if it pops up like that, instead of me having to rely on updating it for the next time. So let's take a look at this one. It's also related to another problem that we have in front-end engineering, is state management and re-rendering. And I'll talk about that in a second. Alright. So how do we actually get this thing working? What information do we actually need? So firstly, we have the song picture. We have the notification when someone joins or someone scored, because it's real time. Song titles and artists. When I enter this form, I should get the correct song, or basically an updated score that I had. So yes, I fill up this one, but actually what happens when I press submit guess? We can do it in two main ways. Firstly, we can do an HTML form submit approach. So the classic HTML form wherein I have a couple of fields, and then when I press that submit, it reloads. So I guess that's another problem. Reloads, it loses the current state. And a simple way to explain the current state is just the information that you currently have on your computer. How do you retain the fact that your player number 12 or your player has a score of 55? That has to persist somewhere. Has to persist on the front end, but also has to persist in the back end. But more so, how do you coordinate with other players if you reload? You're going to lose that connection. So which brings us to AJAX. I think I mentioned AJAX in the previous workshops before. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML is just a method to request data from the front end. So from the front end, we use JavaScript to do AJAX calls. But after receiving the AJAX call, we can modify everything that needs the data. So let's say, for example, I submit that query, it pops up with a modal saying, I got these new scores because I guessed it correctly or guessed it wrong. And that was a modification using JavaScript. But there's more. Now I want to pull in the next song. I modify this picture. I modify the song that's playing. So this is what I was trying to say, is that modify everything that needs the data. And to be able to do that, you find the element by document object model. So basically you traverse around the HTML code. And then you do some janky HTML injection, janky. So we have this new data. This is actually what the typical code looks like. We do a fetch, similar to what we did in the MVC workshop. We do an await for that new data that comes in. And then we have this query selector. We're trying to find this image, for example. And then we set the outer text of it as an src, a new data, the image, so that the image changes. But front-end frameworks, actually, let's talk about front-end frameworks later. Let's think about the problem here, for example. Modify everything. As you've seen here, there's so much element that needs modification. And also, you need to traverse the HTML code multiple times just to modify certain bits and pieces. So let's take a look at this, shall we? So what if I'm playing with my good man Div, We're playing this song guessing game. You know what it's gonna do? He could probably modify the payload of this code, which brings back to this one. So we move that code up a bit. And what if he changes the payload? He does a man in the middle tag, image. He put this part of the code in the image. Now, my image is not going to load, but it's going to execute some form of JavaScript. So we already have some problems with that because we're re-rendering things, but because of the fact that we're injecting janky HTML or JS into our front end, we're vulnerable to certain attacks. So that's just one problem of it, but there's more. So when you try to re-render by that approach, you use JavaScript and then you traverse through the document object model, it becomes slower because you re-render things that should not render. So what if I have a listing? Let's take a look at Gmail, for example. I have a new data and I want to dynamically dynamically render the information there if I have new data. So I probably have somewhere out there in my JavaScript variables that contains all the details about the mails that are inside there. But when new data comes in, that means I have to change certain things. I have to delete some certain elements in the interface, or I have to add certain things. But adding or removing manually is a little bit, it's too tedious. So what you end up doing is try to just render everything. So it's a little bit slower. Here's another bit about it. It's tedious because you have to find the specific element that you want to modify in the first place. Next, security, like what I said, cross-site scripting. So, but the thing is, when we try to add certain codes just to find elements and then modify certain elements, it increases the code complexity that we have to deal with. Here's another bit. Hard to keep track of states, especially if different portions of the user interface relies on certain different data. So yeah, certain things to keep in mind. So, how do we fix it? What's the idea to actually fixing all these problems that we have? Let's go first with the first one, cross-browser supports. In today's technology, we have what's called Babel, which transpiles the new JavaScript syntax to the old JavaScript that is supported. That's one. We have Webpack. Webpack bundles the CSS or compiles the SCSS. Basically, it's just CSS with steroids, That's what S means. I'm just kidding. But that's basically some portions of it because you add variables and a certain type of different syntax in CSS. So, and also, it also bundles our JS code. So like, for example, this one, this certain code that we have, it gets transpiled or translated to this type of code so that every browser is supported. And this is Babel and Webpack are usually used with modern frameworks. But the next biggest thing is, like any good ideas, any way to solve our problem, it starts with the question, what if? So what if HTML is not wet, you know? We're talking about the fact that HTML is tedious, it repeats a lot of time, and then we render certain bits of the HTML parts that doesn't have to render. So, you know, it brings us to the question, what if HTML is a programming language? And, you know, probably there's a lot of developers out there that's going to be laughing at me at this very moment. Because, you know, there's a lot of memes that's coming in. Like, for example, this one. Kids, violence is never the answer. The HTML is a programming language. There you get it. We also have this one. Mom, can I have a programming language on our way back home? So we have a programming language at home. So yeah, there's a lot of bits and pieces about it. But you know, there's a lot of people that are laughing about it. But you know, just let's try to answer this objectively. What if it is a programming language? So, what if I have variables, you know, in HTML? That means I could perform computations to be displayed in an interface. So if I have a certain interface that requires some certain derivation from another data, then I could do that. Next one is, what if I have loops in HTML? So I eliminate repetitive code. Solves our problem with the wet HTML. Next, what if I have functions? And this is probably one of the biggest ones. If I have functions in HTML, then I could divide my interface into modular components. So like for example, in the YouTube case, what if we have a function that actually encapsulates the header? What if we have a function that encapsulates the sidebar? And all sorts of bits. You know, some concepts that we have to think about. But furthermore, what if your interface are defined or determined by parameters? Then that means you have certain parts of your interface that actually changes based on what you gave it to, because that's what functions are. Next is, what if I have conditions? So I have what's called conditional rendering. So it solves our problem with reloading to show different views. What if I just want a view that is, you know, slightly different? Let's say, for example, a page, but the only bits about the page that changes is probably the top left-hand side, which says what page I'm on. So yeah, a little bit of concept, you know. So that's probably the end of the introduction to web frameworks. I'm going to answer that in the React workshop. Okay, shall we continue? Okay, we shall. So let's take a look at this particular example, you know. It's just a simple website, because the reason why I want it to be simple is because there's going to be a lot of code that's going to be showing up. So we have three main sections here. We have the navbar, we have some certain just text here, and then probably one of the coolest one, we have a carousel that shows dog pictures, you know. You click this, it shows you a different dog picture. Okay? So, decomposing the UI. So yeah, navbar, some text, and then the carousel. And this is what the code looks like, you know. This is the part of the navbar, part of the some text, and the carousel. So as you can see, the navbar is its own certain elements. Then right around here, it's encapsulated by a container, and then a row, and then it's divided by two columns. One for the text, and one for the carousel. Let's take a look at one thing that I said previously. What if we can store HTML in variables, you know? Let's store that navbar into a variable, you know? So we have const nav is equal to this particular bit of code. But hang on a sec. What if later in the future, I want different pages in my website? So I want this text to change. So what if now HTML is not stored in a variable? It's stored in a function. So a function, I think you've seen this kind of syntax before. This is an arrow function. So title is our parameter over here. So what if we use that to replace this title? So now it's getting a little bit much more sense. Now, let's go back. So we know that we can store HTML in variables and also store HTML in functions. Let's go deeper. So let's go back here. Now what if, let's take a look at one of the problems we had wherein HTML just repeats itself. Let's take a look at this carousel, for example. I had three dog pictures there. So, but each dog picture will have a carousel item. Well, as you can see, there's really only a couple of bits that change. There's the source image, there's the title, and there's the description. There's also this one, which is determined by the index number. So let's go deeper. What if now we store this HTML code in functions and also use loops? So let's take a look at this code wherein we have a new variable called carousel, and it takes one parameter, dog's data, which is an array of objects. The object will contain three fields: the image source, the title, and the description. So I'm not sure how much you're familiar with JavaScript array ES6 syntax with map. So now, what if we have map on a certain element and also get the index? So we can determine this li elements here, the indicators, by just changing the data slide to field. So it becomes something like this: data slide to the index. How about this particular bit of repetitions? So we could replace this bit with the dog's data and then map with image, title, and description. Now we change the image source, we change the age 5 title over here, and then the descriptions. So the good thing about this one is the fact that it also scales. What if I don't have just 3 pictures of dogs? I have 100 pictures, because you know, we all like dogs. Or at least I'm assuming. This line of code will still remain the same, but this one will just keep growing and growing. So now, we've taken a look at the navbar, and we've taken a look at the carousel. But how do we assemble this to have a bigger picture? Or what you call modular components. So it brings us to this next bit. Don't take a look at this particular bit at the moment. Take a look at the one at the top. So as I've said, we've made those particular interface be encapsulated in a function. So we have the nav, takes one parameter, the royal homepage. Then it takes another one, carousel, which takes the dog's data. So as you can see, it's quite neat. If we compare the code from before, this is what it used to look like. Now it's just a couple of lines of code. It's easier to read and easier to understand. Because it maps directly to the user interface. You have a navbar, you have some text, and you have a carousel. But you know, what if, let's make this a little bit prettier, because functions in HTML are kind of a little bit, it's a weird, because different syntax. What if, let's change it up a bit. Let's use some form of HTML, some customized one. We have a custom HTML tag here that has nav, but it also takes one property, title, which is just the function parameter. That's the same thing for here with carousel. Dog's data is equal to dog's data. So, JavaScript and HTML, right? JSH. So, I guess I introduce you guys to React. So that's the idea of actually React, and let's watch this short video about it. So like what I was saying previously, what if we just store HTML in just functions and variables? So I guess that's React. So just a little bit of introduction. So instead of saying JSH, we say JavaScript in XML. And the exact reason to that, I'm not really sure why. Probably just there are some dude out there that created this that just wants to sound cool, Like Ajax, for example. Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, when actually packed, you're dealing with JSONs, at least these days. So something that you need to know about React is the fact that the JavaScript goes into the braces. That's the reason why in the previous slide, I was using braces to just represent variables that are going inside the HTML. You need a transpiler for that one. So like for example, the earlier one that I said, Babel, because the internet browser does not understand those certain bits and syntax. Also, JSX must only use one parent element. This is going to become more prominent as you develop with React. But basically, this is what a JSX looks like. Firstly, you have variables. It looks like this. But if you want to use functions, you can also do that as well. So now let's talk about property passing. So earlier, we said about functions having certain properties. So let's change it up a bit. So now we're using a little bit of a different syntax because we're using this type of syntax, HTML and JavaScript, so JSX. So things will change a little bit differently. The first parameter that you will always have is what's called props. So as you know with HTML, is the fact that you're always going to have certain properties. The input will have type properties and all sorts of things. So let's be a little bit consistent about that one. We have one parameter, props, and from the props, we can get all the properties that we're going to put inside that HTML or custom HTML content. And from there, we could do certain things about it. We could do what we had previously. We had loops. And then we can also have states and conditional rendering. So thinking about in the previous example, the dog carousel, there's always only going to be one dog picture that is active. And then active is represented by a class name called active. Something like this, active. So let's do that with conditional rendering. So it looks like this. So we're going to have state. State just holds basically the data that represents what the interface is going to look like. Whenever the state changes, the interface will react to the change. So this is where we initialize the state. We import a new function called useState. UseState will have this one parameter, which is what the initial state is. The value goes to the current index, which is the current index of what we're trying to show. And then set current index is just a function to set this value. You might be asking, why don't we just set this particular variable to the new value that we want? Well, something to note about set current index, the new function, is the fact that it's binded with the interface. And binded means whenever state changes, front-end interface changes. That's just what it is. So next, conditional rendering. So conditional rendering is just using JavaScript to have some form of logic. So in this case, if it's the current index, the dog picture that I'm looking at, and then it matches the index of the one of the selection, then we say it's active. Otherwise, we just render a blank class for that one. Similar for this one, for the carousel, we just have the class carousel item, and then we have this JavaScript templater to either have a condition of current index is equal to that. If it's true, it's active. And if it's false, it's empty. So it's basically just JavaScript, ternary of JavaScript. That's the beauty of React, is the fact that it doesn't really add a lot of things. It just combines the existing things. JavaScript combines HTML together. So next one, just to change the state. So whenever we click the left and right arrows, it either sets the current index to the previous one, or it increments it. Yeah. This is probably just, this slide is heavily simplified. So just take note of the fact that I'm not yet handling certain events. Like, what if I went to the last image? What happens if I go to the right? I'm not handling that at the moment. But you know, I simplified it for the purpose that you can easily understand it. Which brings us to probably one of the theory concepts of React that is good to know. So sometimes you may want to run code when a page component goes to a certain page. So let's take a look at this. So with the dog pictures, what about if I'm trying to get those dog pictures somewhere in a certain API, which means that if that particular page loads, I want to run some code. I want to run a code that will ask for dog pictures at my server. So I send a request to an API. I could either send a request to an API, but there's more use for this one. The type of code that I want to run at the start of a certain page, or if a certain component is rendered, I could do a lot of things. I could initialize other components. I could send notifications. So like what I said about the certain things changes. Like for example, what if I have a new data that comes in? I want notifications that comes in. That's an example. I could also may want to do polling or interval fetch. What if I want to periodically get new pictures of dogs for that case? So I have this concept wherein I have a component that gets initialized or written to the code. And then it gets mounted. And then after it gets mounted, it may get updated or get mounted. Let's take a look at some code to make this a little bit clearer. Let's move to a different example. No dogs. Let's move to the one of the examples that I had, which is where I had a React Django to-do app. So what if I want to continuously fetch new tasks that comes in the backend that I have? So I can call with what's called a use effect. Use effect is just a code to run on load or when certain things changes. So this is what the syntax looks like. I have my code over here that runs whenever it's loaded or whenever the input changes. I have what's called the return here, which is code to run when a component disappears in the screen. So when I move to certain different pages. And then input is just the dependency. So this use effect will run every time this input changes. So if you only want your this code to run once on component load, then you just leave it as an empty array. Let's take a look at this example. So this example is it uses the JavaScript interval to fetch new tasks every 10 seconds. So I have this one. I have interval is equal to set interval, then my function to fetch the task, and also refresh the state. And then 10,000 is a milliseconds to just run this particular function every 10 seconds. So it's all good and well. Then what if I went to a different page that doesn't actually require this new information? Then I need to do what's called a cleanup. The reason why I need to do a cleanup is because I don't want to be sending HTTP requests to my server if I don't actually need the data. So if I move to a different page that doesn't require that to do a list, then I have to clean it up by clearing the interval. Yeah, so that one. I think we can finish up with the React workshop. This is the documentation for React and also probably a couple of resources that will help you in development on React. So I hope that makes sense, guys. Do you have any questions?
Good job.
Thank you.
Am I able to explain?
Yeah. What time is it? Alright, we're on track. 15 minutes, React.
Okay.